Bob for accepting the invitation on behalf of the GTC committee. He accepted the invitation without hesitation. So thank you, Bob, for coming all the way to deliver the keynote speech. Professor Makacha is currently an adjunct professor at the School of Hotel and Tourism Management at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, where he served for nearly about 25 years. More recently, he has been a professor in tourism at the University of Queensland Business School. With a career in tourism academia spanning over 3 decades, Bob is truly one of the leading voices in our field. He holds a PhD from University of Melbourne, a master's from Carleton University in Ottawa, and a bachelor's from York University in Toronto. Yesterday we were talking about Bob's origin, and I think Bob is a global, citizen. He was born in Canada, raised in Canada, worked in Australia, and then nearly 25, 30 years in Asia as well. But before joining the academia, Bob has his hands firmly in the industry, working as a nature-based tour guide, a ski instructor, and even leading Canada's wilderness tourism sector as an educator. That real-world experience has always enriched his research and teaching. Not many people have that background, and I think as someone who has some relationship with tourism teaching and research, and I think it's very, very important to have that industry experience. So Bob has had that. And speaking of research, Bob is a remarkably prolific scholar with around 400 publications, including books such as The Business of Nature-Based Tourism, Cultural Tourism, and Tourism Theories, Concepts, and Models. The students of tourism, like myself in the past, and at some stage, they would have used one or more of his publication books, journal articles. So his contributions have shaped the way we understand and teach tourism globally. He's also a past president and fellow of the International Academy for the Study of Tourism and a fellow of COTE. COTE is the peak body of tourism, hospitality and events academics in Australia. So Bob is a fellow of that network. So these show the depth of recognition he has earned across our professional community. So with that incredible background, and given the theme of our conference, Ecotourism, Thriving Sustainable Change, I think there's no anyone better than him to speak at this keynote session and guide us into today's conversations. At the end of Bob's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So get ready your notepad and pens to write down notes and ask a few questions from him. So without taking much time, please join me in giving very warm welcome to Professor Bob Makacha.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I would hold off on all the praise until after the presentation, just in case it doesn't meet your expectations. Can we get the slides up on the whiteboard? While we're getting organized, thank you. While we're getting organized, I'd like to say it's a real honor to be invited here. My impression of Malaysia is very favorable. I've always enjoyed coming here, and which is one of the reasons why I jumped at the opportunity to come here today. So what I want to talk about today is the challenge facing sustainable tourism, and can ecotourism provide a path forward? The world has really been struggling with the idea of how to become more sustainable for 40 years. And in fact, we've gone backwards in almost all measurable sustainable indices. And the United Nations Environment Program said, we're experiencing a dangerous decline in nature and humans are causing it. And as the number of issues they cited were, currently we're consuming the equivalent of 1.6 Earths to maintain our current way of life. And that's only going to get more challenging as economies develop. Ecosystems can't keep up with current demands. 75% of the Earth's land surface has been significantly altered by human actions. 2/3 of the ocean areas are impacted by human activities, including overfishing and pollution. And almost 90% of the world's fish stocks are fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted. And when you think about tourism, it's both a cause and a victim of unsustainable practices. But when you think about tourism, in many ways, we're way ahead of where the rest of the world is and how we can become a more sustainable sector. And when you think about tourism, ecotourism is very much at the forefront of that. So today I want to start with a fairly depressing beginning and then hopefully finish with a much more positive path. Just to let you know, I've been writing and researching about sustainable tourism since 1993. These are amongst the first two papers that I ever wrote. And the first one was whether or not tourism can survive sustainability. And then the second one was whether or not the fundamental truths about how tourism works will lead to our understanding of its social and environmental impacts, and therefore by understanding these fundamental truths, how can we move forward to a less unsustainable tourism sector and ultimately to a more sustainable tourism sector. But I'd like to start with some bad news. And this is the bad news. The Kyoto Accord and the Paris Accord of net zero by 250 is a myth. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. And in fact, when you look at this graph, this is the carbon emissions from when my parents were born, first off. When my parents were born, to when I was born, to when my daughter was born, and to now. And in spite of 40 years of trying to do the right thing, carbon emissions are going through the roof. And the main reason they're going through the roof is we're still reliant on burning coal to generate electricity. Yes, we're moving to renewables, but coal and gas are still the dominant forms that we're looking at. And what's worrying is about climate change, especially, and other ecological issues, is the idea of thresholds. And once thresholds are crossed, then irreversible and rapid changes occur. And it gets into a positive feedback loop where warmer temperatures lead to less snow and ice, which leads to more sunlight being absorbed by land and sea, which leads to warmer temperatures, which leads to less snow and ice and the melting of permafrost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what Jeff Wall has talked about is that we really don't know when we cross that threshold, that systems seem to be resilient and show few impacts until the threshold is crossed. And then once it's crossed, things develop positively and rapidly. And so the issue we have to deal with is how do we approach risk from a cautious standpoint to think about issues that we're not going to be able to resolve. Now, the best guess, the most optimistic guess is that we can keep global temperatures to a 1.5 degree rise by 2050. Last year, global temperatures hit that 1.5 degree threshold. So we're looking at 3, possibly 4 degrees global warming by the time your kids reach my age. Now, is the world going to change? Is the world going to end? Of course not. But it's going to have to change. And we're going to have to change how we cope with climate, how we cope with a range of other environmental impacts, how we cope with unpredictable weather, how we cope with rising sea levels, how we cope with the social and cultural impacts. And if you think about tourism, tourism's currently operating in an unsustainable manner. And this is one of the resorts in Da Nang that was built on a beach, hoping that they could stop natural beach erosion processes, and it hasn't worked. As you can see, the whole resort has collapsed into the ocean, and it's now closed. And I feel sorry for the people who invested in it because they've got a worthless property. But if you take a look at tourism, and especially tourism's carbon footprint, right now it's estimated to contribute 6 to 8% of global carbon emissions. And 6 to 8% doesn't sound like much. But if tourism and transport was a country, we'd be the number 5 emitter in the world. We're a major, major source of carbon emissions. And what's worrying for me as a tourism guy is anti-tourism people say, well, we could reduce carbon emissions by 8% if we just stop traveling. And if we just stop traveling, then we would solve all these problems, except for the fact that so many global economies are dependent on tourism. And if you stop traveling or if you impose a huge carbon tax, then people will not travel, and 50 to 75 global economies are going to collapse. What's even more worrying about tourism is this is the growth curve. The solid line is a very slow global population growth, and pretty soon we're going to go into a population decline. But tourism is growing by 5 to 8% a year, more than twice or 3 times the overall growth in global economies, and more than 3 or 4 times the overall growth in the global population. And so tourism is going to continue to exert impacts. And it's going to continue to grow, especially as emerging economies industrialize, become more affluent, and people start to realize that travel is something that they can afford and something that they want to. And in fact, over the next couple of years, we could see a doubling in demand and a doubling in the pressure on natural resources, as much from domestic tourism as international tourism. And we only think about international tourism in terms of impacts, but domestic tourism makes up 90% of global tourism activity. And the aviation sector is currently running at about 100,000 commercial flights a day, or 5,000 flights an hour. But in the next 10 years, that's going to double. And that means there are going to be about 2 flights every second, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, or 366 days a year during leap year. And cruises are expected to double, and cruises are amongst the most emitting industries. So if tourism is actually going to reach net zero, as the UN Tourism and World Tourism Organization hopes, the rest of the tourism sector is going to have to be net negative to compensate for the growth in aviation and cruise. Now, airlines are becoming more carbon efficient, cruise ships are starting to respond, but the growth is faster than they can become carbon efficient. Oh, by the way, I should mention, there will be a test at the end of this presentation. So I hope everybody's taking notes. And it's going to be a very challenging test. Now, COVID was supposed to be the savior of tourism. And when COVID hit, the whole global academic community said, we've got a chance to rethink tourism. We've got a chance to move to more resilient tourism. We've got a chance to really promote regenerative tourism. We've got a chance to really, really reconsider how we deliver tourism. The only problem is nobody told tourists what academics were thinking. And for all intents and purposes, COVID never happened. As horrible as it was, from a tourism standpoint, 2024 was already above pre-COVID levels, and it's going to happen again. So rather than moving to a new normal, we're moving back to the same old, same old. So the challenge then becomes, how do we develop a sustainable tourism sector? And on the positive side, United Nations Environment Program and WTO have made a commitment to sustainability. But if you think about it, these commitments and policies are easy to write, but they're hard to put into practice. And the other question I have is, what do you sustain? By the way, this will be on the test. And the World Tourism Organization, trying to align sustainable tourism targets to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, has identified 103 targets and almost 900 indicators of what it takes to be sustainable. 108 indicators have been identified to promote inclusive, sustainable economic growth, full and productive program, and decent work for all. 76 indicators are all about reducing inequality within and between countries. 61 indicators are all about protecting and restoring sustainable use of land, 36 about oceans. They're meaningless. And while they may be great ideologically, how many of these indicators do you need to achieve to be sustainable? Or how many of these indicators do you need not to achieve to be deemed unsustainable? You know what happens when you have this many sets of indicators? 4 things happen. The first is, what do I sustain? There's so many choices, I don't know, so where do I begin? And the 4 things that happen are this. You get what they call decision paralysis, where there's so many choices, so many competing choices, so many conflicting choices, and choices that people that aren't very familiar with sustainability have to make. that they don't make any choices. They're abandoned because it's too complex, too many choices, where do I start? Or you choose the low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit is, well, I'll recycle my plastic waste. It doesn't reduce your plastic waste in the first place, but I'll recycle it, it'll make me feel good. I'll throw out my empty food and feed the monkeys. That'll make me feel good. Therefore, I'm supporting wildlife. The third choice is you promote what you're already doing. And what you're already doing, you can say, well, therefore, I'm doing this, I'm sustainable. And then the last choice is you invest in issues or items that generate revenue or save costs. So you put solar in. Again, a great initiative, but you don't put in a sewage treatment system, which is equally as important because solar generates income, solar saves costs, sewage treatment is a cost. And so we have a huge range of issues. And of course, complicating the matter is what is sustainability? Now, I could spend the next 3 hours talking about what is sustainability, but they're basically two different approaches to sustainability. And we could be using the same word, but talking about something completely different. So strong sustainability says the total sum of natural and social capital must not be diminished. And we have to do what we can to improve what we already have. The argument is extinction is forever. But the soft sustainability approach says as long as we generate wealth, then we can consume natural capital and social capital as long as the net wealth generation is positive. Which one does the scientific community want? They want strong sustainability. Which one do governments and industry want? They want soft sustainability. Why? Because industry's got to make money, and that's understandable. Government, especially governments in emerging and developing economies, but also in mature economies, want to ensure that their economy continues to grow. How does the economy continue to grow? Well, you consume resources. And then you've got Donald Trump. And I think the less I say about him, the better. Other than I'm Canadian, so please say whatever you want and I'll agree with you. Don't blame me because I'm not American. But we're stuck in this dilemma that governments want economic growth. And you achieve economic growth through consumption of resources. Scientific community says we've got to conserve what we have, otherwise we're going to lose it. Ecologists say we've got to conserve what we have or we're going to lose it. Where does tourism fit? Tourism fits really awkwardly in the middle. And this is why tourism is not an ally of either side of the sustainability debate. On the one hand, tourism is a business. It generates wealth. And from that wealth, then you can generate social benefits to the community or social benefits to the operator who's going to employ people. But on the other hand, tourism relies on a pristine natural environment. And so it's in tourism's best interest to both consume the resource and conserve the resource. And how do you balance that? And hopefully this is where ecotourism fits. Because ecotourism can be a beacon for sustainable development and show other aspects of the tourism community how economic, social, and environmental goals can be met for the benefit of all to produce a sustainable tourism sector. And this is the hope that still holds for ecotourism. It was identified 30 years ago and it still applies now. It can be a roadmap for how do we change how the rest of the tourism sector occurs. I'll talk about this soon. How can we change consumer beliefs? What are the genuine benefits? How can we rehabilitate damaged areas? How can we prove that small is good, but how can we also prove that big is good? And how can we change tourism and tourists from just having a holiday to maybe learning something? And what can we do to use tourism and ecotourism as a means of revitalizing local cultures and local communities? Now, one of the issues about ecotourism is the difference between an elitist view and a practical view. And the elitist view, and I've heard this so many times, small is good. Anything big can't be sustainable, so therefore it's bad. Anything that makes profit is evil. So profitless is important, is far less important than ecological goals. And the ecotourism market is huge, but our job is to educate them. But really, when you think about a pragmatic view, ecotourism provides a different way to look at outdoor tourism. And it can include the full spectrum of outdoor activities, and it can also include urban activities, and it can also include cultural activities, and that in fact, many of the larger scale businesses are more sustainable than smaller scale businesses, because in many ways, being sustainable brings with it costs. And if you're not profitable, well, then you can sacrifice some of your sustainability actions. If you are profitable, then you can invest in sustainability. And so out of this crisis comes some clarity in recognizing that ecotourism is a diverse product category, that there is urban ecotourism. And in fact, Hong Kong, one of its 4 pillars of its new tourism strategy is ecotourism. Why? Hong Kong's got 2,000 kilometers of hiking trails. They've got more coral, soft coral in the Caribbean. So the government thinks that they can promote urban ecotourism. And then there's soft and hard ecotourism. There's the cultural aspect. But there's also a realization that maybe ecotourism isn't acceptable in all areas. That maybe some forms of harder scale, heavier tourism like resort development are what you do, and you sacrifice these areas to preserve and conserve other areas. And David Weaver talked about the ecotourism continuum. And he said, you know, on the hard side, you've got specialized visits, you've got tramps through the Himalayas, you've got small groups, you've got deep interaction with nature, people make their own travel arrangements. But on the soft side, you've got multi-purpose visits. People will come to a destination and they'll do many things that may include an eco side of things. You've got larger groups, maybe it's more passive, maybe people are looking for more services and greater activities, and maybe they rely on the travel trade to deliver the product for them. And so out of this is really where innovation has to come in and technology transfer. And this is where ecotourism can make a real difference, because by their definition, smaller firms are more innovative. They have to be. There are fewer barriers of bureaucracy they have to go through. And you can trial new things, like you can trial waste reduction, you can trial energy conservation, you can trial water preservation. I was in Tonga in 1993. And the resorts in Tonga were starting to put in solar. And everybody thought, you're just a bunch of hippies. Nobody's going to pay about solar. Driving out of the airport yesterday in KL, the whole rooftop of the terminals were covered in solar panels. As a tourism initiative, the tourism industry said, yes, it can work. It can be upscaled to larger sectors. You can use sustainable building materials, and you can build large buildings with sustainable building materials. And yes, you can engage the community by doing more than just paying wages. So by adopting green technologies and practices, then hotels can distinguish themselves in a crowded marketplace and position themselves uniquely. And there's a hotel chain that's used reclaimed materials for construction decor. And it's not only reduced its environmental impact, it's reduced its cost in building it, it's created a unique product, and it has a cost advantage over other similar quality hotels, which means it has a price advantage, which means it has a competitive advantage. And in fact, Scandic Hotels in Scandinavia was going bankrupt. And they brought in a new CEO, and he brought the staff together and said, what do we have to do? And the staff said, green is what you have to do. What did Scandic do? They got rid of all plastic bottles. What did Scandic do? They put in fountains and glass bottles in every room. They reduced their solid waste by 25% just by getting rid of that packet of goods that you put in the bathroom, because everybody brings a toothbrush. You don't need to provide toothbrushes. They've reduced their energy consumption. They've put in 200 electric generators for their cars. They've done a whole range of things that has allowed them to become really a leader in the sector. And it's now one of the most profitable hotel chains. The other thing you have to do is embed consumer behavior to show people what they can do. And again, ecotourism operators are in a really good position to do this because they tend to deal with the consumers much more one-on-one, and they can affect their behavior one-on-one. So, this whitewater rafting company, they provide lunches as part of the whitewater rafting tour, but the lunches are all served with reusable plates, cups, and cutlery. They're washed in eco-friendly products. They're taken back to their main base. They've avoided using single-use plastics and only sell drinks that are packaged in recyclable material. With their clients, every autumn they have a riverside cleanup, and people come up to volunteer their time to clean up. And their lights are low wattage, etc. So they do a lot of things. And this is something that needs to be appreciated. How big is the ecotourism market? Well, these are what studies prove, and I'm using colons, not colons. Don't believe these figures at all. Because 40 to 60% of tourists are eco-tourists. 40% of all global travel is worldwide, is wildlife related. Up to 50% of international arrivals in Australia are eco-tourist arrivals, and it's growing at 50 to 30% a year. What does that mean? It means that at some point during some trip, somebody may do something that's not urban. Now, there are a bunch of feelings that the market is very attractive. It tends to be better educated. It tends to be older. They tend to do more things in a destination, and they tend to respond well. But this is what research that we've done looking at the cultural tourism market that's also been used to look at the geotourism market, that's also been used to look at the ecotourism market. And if you look at the bottom about how important cultural tourism or ecotourism is in the overall trip decision, you go from low to high, and then you look at the depth of experience. Well, the traditional deep ecotourism market, the purposeful cultural or ecotourist, represents 2% of the consumer market. Now, for long-haul tourists, it's a little bit more, but it's 2% of the market. The serendipitous, somebody who says, I didn't want to participate in eco or culture, but I did and I had a wonderful experience, another 2%. 90% of the market or more, and especially at the bottom end, said either participating in nature-based tourism played no role in my decision to travel, or played a limited role in my decision to travel. And what did I do when I participated in these activities? I participated for fun, for entertainment, for enjoyment, maybe for some excitement. I didn't want to be lectured about global climate change while I was paddling down a river. I wanted to make sure that I survived going over the next rapid. And this is what we have to do when we're educating the tourist. But, and the big but is, that still 90% of people who participate in nature-based or eco products say it wasn't the main reason they traveled, but there still is an opportunity to say, think about your behavior when you're doing other things. We don't use plastic on this trip. Why don't you not use plastic when you go back to the hotel? We use recyclable goods. Why not use recyclable goods? So there are opportunities, again, for ecotourism to educate a mass tourism market. And when we're talking about Asia in particular, we're talking about a mass tourism market. And nature-based or eco becomes a secondary product. But the same principles apply, and especially in China, when you're looking at mass ecotourism from China, that there's an opportunity to say, let's educate large numbers of people. How can we teach them to treat the land better? How can we teach them to treat the water better? The Western approach may not work. An approach that's grounded in their own cultural background will work better because it's something they can relate to. But there are other things too that the eco sector can do. And there's some really interesting success stories. Taronga Zoo in Sydney said that it wants to divert 90% of its total waste from landfill. And by now, currently it's diverted 84%. So it's had a huge success. More than anything else, Taronga Zoo is the greatest user in Australia of single-use ice cream cups. They went to their supplier and said, we don't want any plastic spoons in our single-use ice cream cup. The supplier said, we can't do that. Taronga Zoo said, thank you, we'll find somebody else who can. The supplier said, oh, maybe we can do that. And so they've eliminated plastic spoons from their ice cream cups. And then their food packaging is prepared on site, and they either use edible packaging or they use BioPack, that is biodegradable paperware. And of course, there's the whole issue of corporate social responsibility, where you have to do more than just provide employment. You have to provide micro-job opportunities, you've got to provide opportunities for suppliers, you've got to employ ethnic minorities, and you've got to do more than just pay taxes. So the challenge with sustainable ecotourism is this: what can you really sustain? And how can ecotourism then drive the rest of the global tourism sector? And we've done a number of studies, and this is what we've come down to. There are economic issues, so you've got to consider what your viability is. But there are social issues, and how can you improve the quality of life? How can you empower the residents? How can you control crowding, especially in places that are used by both residents and tourists alike? How can you make sure that the tourists don't impinge on the residents' lifestyle? There are water and water quality issues. How can you reduce your water? How can you make sure that the water that you're getting rid of is cleaner? What do you do to reduce your solid waste? And how can you reduce your energy management? And then, especially in this part of the world where there are so many ethnic minorities, what can you do as an ecotourism operator to celebrate and to conserve ethnic minority cultures? And not just have them as dancing performers, but what can you do to actually conserve the relevation, their relative culture and the integrity of their culture, not only just the lifestyle. And so there are strategies for the future. And you have to accept that ecotourism is part of tourism. Many people in the tourism sector don't. Some of the elitists in the ecotourism sector don't. But if you recognize that ecotourism is part of tourism, then that's how eco can affect the delivery of all other tourism products. Every tourism activity has some impacts. So how do you minimize them? And how do you focus on quality of experience rather than quantity of dollars? Eco-labels, they make you feel good, but research by David Weaver and others has said non-certified businesses are sometimes more sustainable than certified businesses. And then how do you deal with ethical operations to address the social, cultural, environmental, and ecological aspects of tourism? So just to wind up, can tourism be sustainable? The short answer is by next week, no. Can it be less unsustainable? The short answer is by next week, yes. And we can progressively move to being less and less unsustainable with eco as a driving force. The challenge for the tourism sector is immense. 900 indicators is meaningless. But it means that sustainability then is a never-ending process. It's like lifelong learning. You don't expect your students to stop learning once they graduate. The tourism sector has to and can strive to be progressively less unsustainable, and there are things that it can be done, and there are things that can be done by those of you who have an interest in educating future tourism leaders, those of you who are working with industry, and those of you who are also trying to advise governments. And the one thing that needs to happen is that it can be embedded as operational practice. And the ecotourism operators are the ones who have done that. And they need to get out and meet others who are also looking at ways that they can reduce costs, increase revenue through sustainable operational practices. So can tourism ever be sustainable? Maybe. But can ecotourism provide a path forward? Absolutely. So thank you very much. And please, I'll open the floor to any questions anybody may have. And no hard questions, please.
All right. Thank you so much for that insightful and thought-provoking presentation. Bob, delivered an excellent keynote speech covering, starting from a very grim sort of a beginning and looking at what the global economy is doing and how the tourism sector is contributing to that. And then also moving on to the different perspective of ecotourism. Then looking at the innovation and technology, green tech, what can be done in that. And questioning the ecotourism market size. So he kind of ended up the presentation with a bit positive way that, of course, ecotourism has a role to play. So there are a lot of takeaways from Bob's presentation. For me, personally, the main takeaway is that tourism sector itself is a major contributor to the carbon emissions. According to his data, it's about 8%. So, sector itself is responsible for the damage. So therefore, I think it is timely for us to look ways and means of making sure that we achieve the sustainability. So I'm pretty sure that we have some time for questions. I'm happy to start the questions. Now, just going back to the morning session where we discussed about the Fraser Hill as a destination and the challenges Fraser Hill facing in terms of the accessibility and perhaps lack of visitation, etc. Bob, I just wanted to ask you, with that in mind, and a destination like this, nowadays the promotion in tourism is different. The conventional promotion doesn't work all the time, right? So there's this popular promotional technique which we all know as the social influencer marketing. And I just want to ask your opinion about the role of social media influencer in promoting destination like this.
A very good question. Most social media influencers don't care about the environment. And so they're only interested in how can they influence their own paycheck by promoting things that are popular. But I think there is a role for social media, especially tourism social media influencers, to become ethical social media influencers and to start to get the message across by saying, you don't need to buy all these products to be happy. You maybe need to live a different lifestyle to be happy. Now, it's going to be hard to make money doing that because the influencers sell the products that they're trying to influence. But I think those voices need to start to get across. Just as an example, the carbon footprint of a business class air seat is 4 times that of an economy class air seat. Why? Because it occupies 4 times the space. So, personally, I refuse to fly business class. Now, that's a small change that can be made. But if I have to fly, then it cuts my carbon footprint by 3/4. So those are things that can be done where social media influencer needs to start to say, think about your actions. One of the other things about cars that in Australia, in Hong Kong, in America, electric cars produce as much carbon emissions as petrol-powered cars. Now that seems to be intuitively wrong, but you've got to look at where the source of the electricity is being generated from. And the source of the electricity in Australia, in China, in Hong Kong, in India and in America is coming from gas and coal-powered stations. And so the actual emissions are localized where the power station is, but electric cars aren't any greener than petrol-powered cars, unless you have green and renewable energy sources providing the electricity. So those are the types of messages that people need to get across. And that's where a good influencer, somebody who's about 50 years younger than me, has much better legs than me, can start to change people's behavior.
Right. Thank you, Bob. I think we have time for few questions. I'm happy to open the Q&A. Yep. Do we have a microphone there? Okay. Thank you.
No,
All right.
please don't ask me why Hong Kong is home.
No. Malaysia, my home. All right. Thank you, Prof, for your insightful sharing. It's very interesting. I just saw the point that you mentioned earlier regarding on acceptable consumer behavior, where you mentioned about plastic, where you mentioned about electric car, and then using economy flight. So are there any benchmark that define acceptable consumer behavior? Is it defined by reducing consumption per tourist or redirecting the alternative use? And second, related to the carrying capacity, when we talk about Perbadanan Taman Negara, we have Perbadanan Taman Negara Pahang, right? So we also promote that as part of ecotourism place. But in Malaysia, every weekend, public holiday, it will become mass tourism there, like traffic congested, and then lots of things happens. So related to the carrying capacity with these places or protected area, do you have any comments on that?
Well, yes, I think I heard your question. There's a bit of an echo here. So there's nothing wrong with mass tourism. And in fact, mass tourism is what drives the tourism industry, and mass tourism is really where the future of tourism is going to lie. You can do it better, but it's going to be done. In terms of protected areas, 30 years ago I was in Taman Negara. And 30 years ago, Taman Negara was just jungle with jungle all around it. Now, the last time I looked at aerial photographs, pretty much all the jungle's been cleared right up to the border of the protected area. And so one of the challenges that governments have to face is how can they create more protected areas, and how can they rehabilitate damaged land? And because national parks are a terrific idea, but they're not the only ecological objective that governments have to deal with. Did that kind of answer your question? If not, I'll talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Bob. I think I've been informed that we have time for one more last question. Of course, Bob will be around during the lunch and also, rest of the day as well. You could talk to him and have conversation. So one last questions from anyone from the audience.
Okay, and then I have the test.
We'll take the test after that.
One test question.
One question there.
Thank you so much for your impressive, insightful presentation. And I like the way you highlight the evaluation of ecotourism. And may I ask, in your opinion, what are the most important new trends emerging in ecotourism today? And what research frontiers do you think deserve great attention from scholars and practitioners in the coming years?
Okay, so the most important trend is the massing of ecotourism. It's no longer just me with my van taking people out into nature. It's now me with my 54-seater bus or a whole trainload of people going out into nature. And and delivering a quality experience that does as little damage as possible. So I think that's the trend. It's no longer just hippies doing hippie things. It's business people making business decisions. And your second, the second question is the biggest change. I think Professor Nair is going to talk about that, and that's technology. And I think this is where we can have the greatest impact.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the test question is, what color tie was I wearing when I came in here today? What color tie was I wearing when I came in here today?
The color of his tie.
Oh, you're paying attention. I wasn't wearing a tie. Congratulations, everybody passes. So thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Bob. Look, I think we all agree that it was a very insightful presentation. What I really most like is that the way he questions the conventional wisdom about ecotourism. So ladies and gentlemen, let's take another round of applause to appreciate Professor Bob McEachern. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Bob McEachern, for the inspiring keynote address, and thank you for our moderator for guiding the session. This marked the end of our keynote session. So ladies and